hit that snare. When you go to recording studios, they usually have a lot of snares in-house. I mean, studios love to collect everything, but snare drums are huge in every studio. In fact, right behind me are some fantastic snare drums, and they're everywhere. And you know, different snare drums for different tempos, different songs, different aggression. But if you point the camera over here, I have a special snare drum. This is the Vinnie Paul snare drum from Paramore and the Riot album that we used on 4 or 5 different songs, and this is the Misery Business snare. Here we are at the Barbershop Studios on beautiful Lake Pacong, New Jersey, and this is obviously the exact Paramore snare drum from Misery Business and a few other songs on that record. Originally, when we recorded that record, it was at the House of Loud, which is about 30 miles from where we are, which was a studio that we owned. And today we're in a great environment, and we're going to actually be recording some of the snare drum and listening to the playback and the room sounds and what magic this snare drum brings. We didn't use this snare on every single song, certainly Misery Business, and I think that's what you get. But there were other songs that had all sorts of different snares, DW snare, actually 2 different kinds of DW snares, and a pork pie. So this really felt great at the time. We tried a bunch of different snares in the studio, and a lot of it had to do with obviously the drummer, and I'm not a drummer, so I'm not gonna pretend. But Zach Farrell played this, and we did use a Remo head just like this. We tried a few different heads, the dot, clear, and it just didn't feel right. This felt more organic. So I want to go through, we're in a studio, we're in a beautiful studio here. Obviously we've got, again, lots of rock all over the place. All the walls here have rock, so you can really get that bounce. So maybe just a few inches is the 57. And I should say, a lot of studios have 57s, and obviously they're a great mic, they're $100. But I also know that not every 57 after a year or 2 years sounds the same. So make sure that when you're recording, that you check it, put them up against each other. They get hit, they take a lot of beating, these microphones. And what happens a lot is this. Drummers hit them too. And they hit their hi-hats and everything else. So you gotta be very careful that you've got great sounding and new sounding SM57s. Underneath is another 57. I don't know if you can get around here to see where it sits. It's just off to one side. And again, it's the same amount of distance, probably in this case, a few inches. And of course they work together. You have to make sure the phase is correct between the 2 mics. That's pretty obvious, but that's very important as well, because if you don't, you're gonna get paper. I love the snare. It's always had a interesting ring to it, almost like a tone. At the time we recorded this, we did have these gels. We also had a wallet on this drum with tape all over it. That's what we used to do, or even sometimes half a wallet. Nowadays, obviously, there's all sorts of different tips and tricks and tools you can use. Clamps. The one thing we did all the time with our snare drums back at the House of Loud was we would always make sure that we would turn at least an 1/8 up on every take, because it would drop. If you're hitting the snare drum, and you can see right away because of the potholes in the middle or anywhere, and I just hit the drum pretty bad, like I'm hitting it all over the place. We used to do a circle. Make sure that it's not dropping every take, because that's terrible when you're trying to edit. You're gonna edit one snare drum and another one's lower, and then gets lower as the song goes. So was always aware after every take. And also, obviously you can't keep the same head on for song after song, because it's gonna fall apart and the tone is gonna go. This snare drum I bought at a horn store, mostly for trumpets and like band for kids almost. And they had a few amplifiers and a few guitars, nothing really serious. It was like a big store that had been there, a lot of sheet music in there. And I saw this, it had kind of dust all over it, and I don't think anyone was really interested in it. I think it cost $150. They were happy to see it go. they were like, finally somebody bought this thing, and sort of went back to the studio, and there it was, and we just put it down, and we needed a deep snare. And this is what showed up. So this is it. And what I'm gonna do today is we've been hitting the snare, and we're gonna go back into the room, and we're gonna listen to it in its different machinations. One of it's gonna be with reverb from a plugin, one of it's gonna be with the Coles 4038, the room itself, and we're gonna listen to the sound of the room, and we're gonna see the different options we have and compression that we have that will give us a better overview of how to get a snare sound using different combinations. So that's the beginning of this part of the video. After walking you through what we did in the studio room, we're back in the control room. We're on the SSL, the K-Series, and what we're going to do is show you how it was recorded, the snare, and the different options that you would have. So this is basically just the snare drum, and it's condensed down into 8 or 10 tracks, and just showing you the different options. So here, the first two I've got is a reverb, and I would usually put it off to one side. This is the dB verb, which shows up here, which is the make-believe metric halo verb that I put out this year, or they put out, with a little mixer, and I've set it up the way I would normally listen to it, with the different lengths of reverb. The first track here is a microphone 57 on the top snare, and next to it is the snare bottom. Again, it is the 57, and we're running them through the Neve 1084s over there, just a little bit of top and maybe a little bit of mid. This snare is a mono distressor, which is over in the corner, and it's just a compressor that makes it a little bit smashed up. And then this I'm gonna add in, which is a sample from our One Shots Drum Forge pack. And then next to that, the two Coles microphones. There's no distortion on them, they're clean, they're right out of the room. And the last thing here is those same exact microphones, but smashed through the distressor. And so that's the setup. And what I'm going to do now is play them for you so you can hear the different snare effects and the snare drums with nothing on them at all. Okay, here we go. So this is the snare, bottom and top. First thing I'm going to do is just take away the bottom so you can hear the snare by itself, just so you have an idea. And now I add in the bottom. Obviously that fills it out, gives it a little bit more of a rattling ring. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the snare distressor, which is a compressor that's going to make it explode a little bit more. And I don't think the settings are drastic, probably 2, 3 to 1. You can hear the ring, it's more pronounced. You can hear the attack. Everything sort of seems a lot more in your face. Again, this is not a lot of compression, just a little bit. But what you're hearing is the snare drum in its natural state, obviously with a little bit of love from the compressor. Now I'm going to add in the Coles and the stereo room, and that way you can hear what the room does to the snare. And again, there's nothing on these first microphones. There's no compression on them, they're just dry. I think that's the beginning of a wonderful snare drum sound, not having done much to it at all. Maybe the most drastic thing being the distressor, which is bringing it out a lot more. But other than that, this is two $100 microphones on a $150 snare drum in a pretty good room, which you could probably recreate pretty quickly. So this is just the basic room sounds, and I'm now going to take these out, these Coles microphones, and I'm going to add in a smashed room, which is going to give you more excitement. So the room has been compressed. Obviously, you're hearing a lot more excitement, a lot more ambience, and a lot more aggression, depending on how loud you want to put these. I mean, obviously, I would ride these in a mix. You got to be very careful. If you have them in the whole time, it'll basically sound exactly the same with every hit. And you would probably put a lot of this on the kick drum as well, in a combination of a kick snare in a stereo room that's been compressed. So obviously, it has one sound. I would ride it up and down. I'm just going to do it right now. I'm going to show you what it would sound like, just the snare drum, using different levels. And loud. So that is an example of what the room does. I use ADR, I use whatever I have that's going to smash really hard. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the dB verb, which I haven't put in yet, and I'm not going to use any room for that. That way you can hear what the reverb sounds like by itself with the snare drum. Here we go. That's a plugin, and I'm very proud of this plugin and what we did with it. And Rick Carson did a wonderful job putting this one together. It's many different reverbs that I would normally use, but I think when I listen back to it, it sounds exactly to me like the snare drums I've recorded before with those effects. Now, here's the last thing I'm going to put in, and this has been a subject of many, many different opinions, and that is the drum sample. Drum samples are good if used in the right place. A lot of drummers I work with are wonderful players, and they don't like these. They don't like samples. They want to hear the natural sound of them hitting the drum. And at the same time, they don't care too much for the help that engineers give them, although when we start to build bigger tracks, huge tracks with big guitars, background vocals, bass, the drums got to hang, and you start with the drums as the hang point. So right now, I've had no sample in here, and I'm going to add one of my samples to give you an idea of what happens. Now, this is to taste. Some people only use samples. I like the combination of a real snare drum, especially if it's a great sound. And I like to just give it a little bit of love, a little bit of help, depending on what the track is like and how aggressive it is. Obviously, when you're doing double kick drums and snare drums in a metal situation, you're going to use more samples to define everything clearly. So now I'm going to play that snare drum back without it, and then I'm going to add the sample in so that you can hear. I like it behind. I would say 70-30 is my perfect place to put the sample, depending on what's in the sample and how much aggression it has. Here we go. Sample. A lot of sample. A little bit. No reverb. The room. The room, note smash. The room smashed. And there's some different options. I think there's many different options. I just counted maybe 10. It all depends on how you hear the track, how the tempo of the track is, and also how much you want the drums to be real as opposed to having a lot of love to cut through everything. So I use samples to me as another instrument. I know a lot of people like to use them solely and really not hear. I think once you add a room in, like we have a wonderful room it brings the natural sound of the snare drum back. I'm going to do one last thing here, and I'm going to use a little, I'm going to take all of the distorted and just put the natural room itself in, the room itself without any compressors, and I'm going to slide this in, this sample, and I'm going to also lose the reverb so you get it exactly the way the sample sounds without any kind of affecting differences. A little bit more, a little bit more, and there it is. It's pretty big, but I'm not sure it's the most musical. So again, I would be writing these samples in the mix. I wouldn't leave them in one place and walk away. If there's a fill coming up, you can write it up slowly. If there's a huge snare part to the song, you can bring up the room and the snare drum. It's all about how you hear the music and really how much you really want to mix and see things in a dimension as opposed to having them straight up and in your face. Just to recap, the sample is called Smack Daddy, and it's from Drum Forge, and it's my One Shots pack. And the reverb here is the DB Verb by Make Believe and Metric Halo. Just so you know, today we were using the 1081 Neves that are over here as the mic pre's. And I really just also wanted to mention that, of course, this is all the amazing gear, and as much as this is incredible to work in front of, having said that, I also think that having the right drummer with the right snare drum and the right kit and the right song and the right way they hit is just as important, if not more important. The creativity of that drummer, the heads, of course, all the technical part is so important, and the drumsticks and how big they are. We could go on and on. But without a great song, without a great drummer to go through it, there's really not much there until that happens, and they bring the excitement from that room into this room, and that's where the magic happens. Thank you for coming with me on this little journey from the studio itself into the control room and having a good look at the layout here of what it would look like and how to move things within each other to create depth and color.